You don't change norms and attitudes by just going at it once or twice.
Welcome, Secretary Clinton. I'm Corey Hike, publisher of Mike. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Corey.
Our pleasure. We've assembled key staffers here at Mike who are going to ask you questions about your book. We've all read it. What happened? At Mike, I lead a newsroom that seeks to amplify diverse voices. We put reporters on stories that in many ways are impacted personally by the things that they're covering, and that's purposeful. What we'd like to do is pull on some of the string in your book that starts to reveal some of the nuance of the feminist conversation in America. Before we get into your book, though, a question off of the news. You recently said something, made a comment about Russia. So if you wouldn't mind answering that question first, and then we'll dive right into your book.
Great.
Okay, Emily?
Yeah, so Secretary, you said you wouldn't rule out questioning the legitimacy of the election if we found out that Russia interfered. So the question I have is, what bar is that for questioning the legitimacy? Where does that bar stand?
Well, first, Emily, I think that no one, including me, is saying we will contest the election. I am in the very large group of people who believe that there's no legal basis, no constitutional basis for that. But as I write in my book, in fact, a whole chapter devoted to Russia and what Russia did to our country, there are serious questions being raised by the congressional investigations, obviously by the special counsel, Mueller's investigation. And I think depending upon what is found in those investigations, it won't be just me. It will be millions of Americans who raise questions about the legitimacy of the election. And that's not just about looking backwards. I think it's important to find out what happened, to really dig deep and to understand what the Russians did. But it is about protecting ourselves going forward, because I have no doubt, having dealt with Mr. Putin over a number of years, that they believe they succeeded in destabilizing our democracy, raising questions, sowing divisiveness among our people, and they're not going to disappear because it worked for them. So they'll be back in 2018, they'll be back in 2020. And I certainly think even before we get to all the answers that I hope will be forthcoming, we all do more to defend our democracy and protect our electoral process.
You also brought up in your interview with Terry Gross yesterday about the Mercer family. And I'm curious if you were trying to say that the Mercers had something to do with the Russian interference in the election.
I think we have to put a question like that, which I think is a serious question that needs to be asked and tried to be answered, in a broad framework, because in that interview I said there is a series of questions being raised in the UK about the role of a Mercer company called Cambridge Analytica in their Brexit election. Just recently there were questions raised about the attacks, the hacking attacks on the presidential election in Kenya. And again, you find Cambridge Analytica, the Mercer company, involved there. We know that Cambridge Analytica and the Mercers played a major role in Trump's election, starting from early summer when he captured the nomination going forward. I think this is a worthy area for exploration. I'm not going to sit here and say we know that they cooperated with a foreign adversary, but I think as we're finding out the way our own companies, particularly Facebook, have been taken advantage of by the Russians, we need to find out what other companies either were doing or had done to themselves by some kind of connection, and try to prevent that from happening again too.
Now into your book and the women that voted for you. Erin?
So 94% of Black women voted for you in this election. Your campaign staff was also filled with Black women. What is one lesson that you learned from a Black woman while on the campaign that you think every woman should hear?
Great question. I really have to go back and say I've been learning lessons from Black women since I was young in law school, when I first went to work for Marian Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund. And you're right, I've had the blessing of a great group of friends and advisors, colleagues going back decades, my chief of staff in the White House, my chief of staff in the State Department, high-level black women in my campaign, the mothers of the movement whom I write about in my book. So I guess the lessons that I would like to share, first and foremost, are that my friends have taught me the importance of faith and perseverance in the face of often really difficult problems having to do with loss and disappointment, injustice. It's not easy to keep going, but they have showed me by example and have encouraged me to follow that example.
In the chapter on being a woman in politics, there's a pretty dramatic moment that struck me, and I think struck a lot of us, that you described, that is personal, but I think important to explore. Susie has that question.
Secretary Clinton, the incident in your book that you describe happened when you were 29, working for Jimmy Carter's election or campaign.
Right.
Could you tell us what happened?
Yes. Because it obviously made a big impression on me, because I'm still thinking about it all these years later. I was working in candidate Carter's campaign in Indiana. I was sort of the political organizer for the state. And among my responsibilities were to really make sure we were doing everything we could to turn out the vote on Election Day. And there were a group of people helping on this, and they were complaining to me that they couldn't get specifics out of a group of men who had long history in campaigning in Indiana. And it was getting very frustrating, because we wanted to know, look, if somebody's not going to be in this precinct, we need to send them, or if they're not going to get the cars out, we need to do it. So I said, okay, well, let me see if I can pin them down. And so I asked them if they wanted to go to dinner. There was about 6 around a table about this size. And, you know, after the pleasantries, I said, you know, I really need to understand, so what are your responsibilities, and what are you going to do, and what more help do you need? And they just were blowing me off. And I don't know whether it was because they didn't have answers, or they didn't want to give answers to a 29-year-old young woman. I don't know all of the thought process behind that. But I finally just turned and I said, look, I'm responsible ultimately for making sure we have a really good Election Day operation. I need to know what you're going to do, and if you're not going to do it, tell me that. And this man reached over, you know, it was late October and I had on a turtleneck. He reached over and he grabbed me right on my sternum, and it was like a scene from a bad movie, you know, sort of twisted my turtleneck and just basically told me to shut up. And I was shocked. And I said, you know, take your hands off me, and, you know, that's not an answer to anything. But I was really shaken. And I've thought about it a lot, because there was such a kind of contempt or disdain to start with, like, we don't owe you answers, we're not going to tell you. But coupled with what I saw as a really aggressive action like that, it just made me understand that, you know, we have to be aware of everything we do all the time as young women, like I was back then, but we can't back down. So it's a tough combination that we're always trying to figure out.
You do mention that incident alongside one in college rather briefly, and I just wonder, you say it's nothing compared to the violence that some women experience.
That's right.
While that might be true, do you also worry that women tend to downplay or minimize these bad personal experiences?
I think historically that is true. I think for a very long time, many women blame themselves for anything that happened to them. I use that example because, you know, it was again a moment in my own life that raised a lot of these questions. You know, a blind date who wouldn't take no for an answer, wouldn't leave me alone, but I was in a situation where, you know, basically I could, you know, slap him and get out of there, right? But that's not the case for so many women who find themselves in difficult, even dangerous situations. So I wanted to tell the story because I know what that felt like back then. And I know that so many women of all ages, but particularly young women, still feel like their personal experience is diminished, is disbelieved. And I want them to understand that they have to keep speaking up and standing up and supporting one another in trying to take a stand against aggressive and even violent behavior.
Do you think things are better or worse now in a way? If something like this happened in your campaign with one of your staffers, what do you imagine the current environment with Trump's, sort of remarks about grabbing not by the turtleneck, actually,
yes, not
by the turtleneck. What do you think? Have we moved forward, or are we in danger of going backwards?
Well, I see it as a very important point of challenge in our progress right now, because obviously I think we've made progress on many, many fronts. A lot of the institutional barriers, the laws have been thankfully knocked down. When I was your age, there were things I was prohibited from doing just because I was, a woman. I couldn't apply for scholarships, I couldn't get jobs. There were just lots of doors that were closed. So on a legal basis, we have to prevent there being any pushback that takes us back. And I do worry about that with this current administration in terms of their negative behavior towards civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and everything else. But I think on an attitudinal basis, we were making progress because it became unacceptable. It became, out of the norm for people to be overtly sexist. And I think that Trump has given permission to a lot of people that they don't have to follow that kind of courtesy, that respect that should be just how we raise kids and treat each other. So I think it's important that we continue to speak out and share our experiences so that somebody who is an admitted sexual assaulter in the Oval Office doesn't give a platform for even more people to think it's okay, it's not a big deal, what are you getting upset about because of what I called you or how I treated you? No, that's not acceptable, and we need to be clear about that.
Turning back to your book and some of your analysis and insights into ultimately what happened, Stephanie has a couple of questions from the campaign.
Yes. Secretary Clinton, in multiple interviews since you've released this book, you've brought up a theory that a good number of young women may not have voted for you because of pressure they felt from men in their lives. Is this idea that women were swayed by men hypocritical to your feminist message?
Well, I didn't exactly say that. I know that's how it was reported because I wrote about the conversation that I had with Sheryl Sandberg, one of many conversations about the research that exists that really compares how women are treated and how they conduct themselves at work and in politics under a lot of pushback and pressure. And I made the point that there is a lot of, just a lot of lines that, are drawn that are invisible that women cross and get a payback for. Example, if you're a woman in service to somebody else, you're working for a man, you're working for a company, you're working for a cause, and you're really working hard, you will be given a lot of positive feedback. If you go to the head of Mike and you say, Corey's doing a great job or Emily's doing a great job, I really hope you'll reward them. You get a lot of positive feedback. If you step into the arena yourself and you say, you know what, I'm working really hard, I think I deserve a raise too, or in my case, you step in the arena and say, I think I could be a good president. There is just a continuing set of attitudes and reactions that view a woman who does that negatively. There are so many reasons for that. It's not just one set of reasons, but it is something that we need to be very aware of, because a lot of women pay the price, and a lot of women, decide, look, it's just not worth it. It's not worth pursuing this in the face of all kinds of pushback and negativity, and so, I'll just go do my job, and I'm not going to, push myself forward. That pressure comes from society, and society's norms are still largely male-related. So whether it's somebody you know or somebody that has control over your lives, this does conspire, in my experience and based on all the research, to really send women a message not to be too aggressive or too confident, because you'll face some negative reactions.
Bringing it back to your book a little bit, in it you express some guilt around moments where you may have inadvertently harmed your husband's past campaigns. But there were several moments last year where it appeared like your husband was a distraction to yours, most notably when Trump brought several women to the second debate that had accused your husband of sexual assault and harassment. Did Bill ever apologize to you for maybe being a liability of any kind to your campaign?
No, and that's an example I talk about in the book, because that was something that had been litigated years ago. And of course we knew it was a tactic by Trump to draw attention away from the Hollywood Access tape. So I saw it more as an awful stunt by Trump and the people around him that was really a kind of, demeaning diversion that he was trying to bring about. So no, I didn't see that. I didn't see that as connected directly. And, I do in the book talk about mistakes I made. I talk a lot about missed opportunities or things that I did or said that I wish I had, done differently, or I could take back and go redo. But I don't, my campaign and everybody who helped me, including my husband, was out there every day doing the best job they could. And so I don't spread that blame beyond myself. I talk a lot about the extraneous circumstances that were unprecedented, that affected the campaign. Obviously sexism and misogyny writ large, and voter suppression, which is an increasing problem, and FBI Director Comey and the Russians. I talk about all of that because those are things that are going to be with us and that we have to come to grips with.
Did that moment, though, because of the women that Trump had invited, did it make you change your strategy at all for that second debate with the Access Hollywood tape looming?
No, it didn't, because I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to raise those doubts, and he was trying to get inside my head. And I wasn't going to let that happen. So really, I had practiced this. I really prepared for all the debates. I kind of thought being prepared is what you should do when you're running for president. And so I did. And we practiced for that second debate, and we were as shocked as everybody else about the Hollywood Access tapes. And so when I was walking out, one of my key debate team members said, he's trying to get inside your head. And I said, yeah, you think? I mean, I knew exactly. What I talk about in the book, though, is slightly different. It's one thing to practice in a hotel room how you're going to respond when someone is stalking you and making faces at you and invading your space. And I practice being calm and composed and not letting him throw me off in any way. Again, thinking that being calm and composed is probably good for somebody who's president. But when it's actually happening in real time, it is discomforting. And he's a big guy who likes to assert himself physically, making gestures and scowling and everything we know he does. So I was thinking, not about what had happened before the debate, but in the moment of the debate, maybe staying calm and composed is not the best thing, because I'm feeling really, very frustrated and irritated at the way he's behaving, and maybe I should just spin around and say, back up, you creep. And I didn't, because for a lot of reasons, I concluded that that would not be smart, that would be probably playing to him, because he likes to create these emotional confrontations like he did in the Republican primary. So I didn't do that, but it would have been pretty satisfying, I think, if I had, on a personal level.
So another question from us, and really on the topic of behavior, I would say. You were in the unique position which you write about, where you were a presidential candidate and also a former first lady. In your time there, you got a lot done. Looking in the current administration and the current First Lady, Ashley has a question.
Secretary Clinton, you write a lot in your book about the vitriol you face on the campaign trail, much of which was directed towards you online. As we all know, President Trump has made it a habit of amplifying some of the worst voices on the internet, be it sexist or racist. But Melania Trump, as First Lady, her platform is cyberbullying. Do you think she's doing enough with her platform?
No, and look, I don't think anybody's doing enough on cyberbullying, because it's real and it has a particularly damaging effect on young people who are so influenced by and personally affected by what is said about them or said to them. I really worry about it as a major issue. It was something that I talked about in the campaign, and I wanted to do more. I think there'd be a lot of people who'd be willing to help her if she were serious about actually following through, because we've got to try the best we can to make the internet, particularly social media, either understand, we talk about it as though it's a person, this organism of social media, understand the impact that it can have, particularly on vulnerable people, particularly on susceptible young people. And we need more voices that are not just firing nasty shots back, but saying, time out. No, this is not the way you talk to anybody. This is not how you conduct yourself. You would never do it in person. I make that point in the book too. People say horrible things about me online, all the time. But when I meet some of the same people I know who've said horrible things to me online, they just can't be nicer, And I'm sitting there thinking, what's this schizophrenia and how does that really work? And it's one thing if you're a grown-up, you're an adult, you've lived your life, but if you're a kid and, people are saying horrible things to you, in the locker room at gym or walking down the hallway, you see a face, you can figure out how to respond, but then all of a sudden it migrates online and people living half the world around pile on. So I think it's a really important issue, and if she were serious and able to follow through on it, I bet there'd be so many people who'd be willing to try to help her on that.
As female journalists, we've all unfortunately been at the receiving end of so much violent harassment online. Do you think social networks like Twitter and Facebook are doing enough to address this?
No, I don't. And I think this is one of the critical debates we're going to have. I mean, obviously, we know that they have standards that they're supposed to be applying. I admit these are sometimes difficult standards, because where does the First Amendment stop and where does hostile, violent speech begin? But they have to do a better job. And again, I think this is something that, women like all of you and me who are in that cauldron online and who are not only being attacked by real people, but by bots, because of what you say and who you stand for and your willingness to get out there and express an opinion. We've got to do more to try to rein that in, because you think about the tens of thousands of bots that are being sent out into the online world. to tear people down and what their agenda is. Some of it is political, some of it is commercial, some of it is ideological. We need to have more support from tech companies and from people themselves online, pushing back on this and making it unacceptable.
Have you brokered those conversations with those companies?
No, we did a lot of outreach to them, and I intend to do some more. I have spoken about it publicly. That's one concern that we need to address. Selling ads on Facebook to Russian companies, getting paid in rubles.
Which is now known.
Which is now known, and which many of us suspected because of some of the forensics that were done by others. I went to the Recode conference out in California a few months ago, and a lot of incredibly successful, smart tech people were saying they're going to discover more and more of this, and how it was used to promote not just specific political messages against me, which I think was a major goal of theirs, but sowing this divisiveness, creating fake events with Russians posing as Americans, fake Americans, fomenting racist, sexist, Islamophobic, homophobic messaging, even demonstrations. We've got to sort this out because there's too much at stake. We can have a vigorous debate. We don't agree on everything. I'm all for that. But when you have not just outside agitators, but foreign adversaries, particularly Russia, which is well experienced in what are called active measures, designed to sow propaganda and discord and disbelief and hate and violence. I want Americans to be able to say, you know what, get out of my life, Russians, get off my feed, get out of my, online social media world. I'm going to argue with Americans. We're going to argue. And, we've got a big argument going on right now. The Republicans are trying one more time to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. That's huge. It will destroy the health care of millions of people. So let's argue about real stuff that's going to affect real Americans and not get diverted and confused by these efforts coming from outside as well as being fomented and amplified by voices inside.
On that note, we have a couple of questions from our outside celebrity friends of Mike that we want to show you.
Sure.
And this can be a lightning round. You
Okay.
can respond in a minute or so.
Okay.
We're going to show them right up here, actually.
Okay, great.
The first is Amber Rose.
Oh, great.
Hey Hillary, my name is Amber Rose. I'm a mother, activist, entrepreneur, published author, and the owner of the Amber Rose Slut Walk. As a woman, you always seem to be judged on points by your male counterparts. About what you're wearing, how your hair is, if you seem nice and warm. And in your new book, you talked about the remarks that Trump has made and how he was looming over you during a debate, like a super creep, which he is. Politics in general has always been a male-dominated industry. What do you think it would take for women to succeed in a space that is historically male-dominated?
Great question, Amber. Look, I think it's going to take what is necessary in every sector of society. More and more women being willing to get into that arena, whether it's in Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C. You cannot win a game you don't play. You cannot make a contribution if you're not there at the table. So I say in the book, look, sexism is a problem, but that shouldn't stop you from being an engineer who wants to have a great tech startup, and it shouldn't stop you from running for office and getting out there and speaking up and being as strong and unapologetic as you can.
Next is Sophia Bush.
Hi, Hillary. Sophia here. I'm wondering, because you are such an expert, what you think the progressive movement needs now, and who are leaders out there in the world that you believe in and or outside of politics?
I like to say I'm a progressive who likes to get things done. I have always been, committed to two goals: economic justice, social justice. I don't think you can have one without the other. I don't think you say, okay, we're going to get the economy fixed and everybody's going to be happy if you're still dealing with sexism and racism and other kinds of invidious discrimination. So you have to keep moving forward on both. And there are so many great voices out there, and not just in politics. And for a minute, let's look at the voices that you've already had with two women who are well known. We need people speaking out on behalf of economic justice and social justice. And there are lots of good people in the Congress trying to do that, people in states and cities trying to do that, but we need more voices. And we need people to understand the ultimate goal is to win enough elections to be able to make decisions that will actually move the progressive agenda forward. It doesn't do any good if you can't win. I mean, you can be a great voice, but you see healthcare getting taken away, you see DACA getting taken away, you see so many things going on that are in furtherance of the goals of a very small, wealthiest of the wealthy, ideological, partisan group in our country. And that's what we have to stand against. And that should be an invitation to as many people as possible.
Excuse me, Secretary Clinton. On the topic of winning or not winning, you've talked about how women who express anger are seen as off-putting or even frightening. Why then shouldn't any woman who simply expresses anger, be it Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or anyone else, why should they actually win a presidential election?
Because I'm going to do everything I can, and I hope you all will too, to say that we need to end the double standard. In the book, I write about how women who I've worked with, women whom I respect, and not just Democratic women, obviously it's both sides of the aisle, that when they are intense, passionate, they are viewed as angry. I don't think they're angry. I didn't think Elizabeth Warren was angry on the floor of the Senate reading Coretta Scott King's letter. I didn't think Kamala Harris was angry trying to push Jeff Sessions to give an answer. I don't think my friend Kirsten Gillibrand was angry when she stands up and talks about sexual assault in the military. So why do we let people get away with characterizing, how women express themselves? I think it's time for many more people to stand up and say no. And if you're on a show or you're in journalism, certainly, and you hear these put downs like, she's so angry. No, she's not. She's intense. She's passionate. She cares. And we want more of that. And that's what we need to be standing up for.
Piggybacking off of that, you talk though about how there were so many more women on the campaign trail as reporters, and yet we didn't see a change in how they talked about you, whether they talked about your voice or being warm. So why do you think that didn't jive, more women reporters changing the tone of coverage?
Well, I think it's because they know what will get them on air and what will please their editors. That's what I feel, because you can see it. There's so much, the peer pressure question. There's so much power in peer pressure. And look, you're trying to make a career, whether it's in politics, journalism, Silicon Valley, wherever it might be, there are already existing norms and standards. And you're going to be judged by them. And when you say, well, gosh, I thought she sounded great saying that. And somebody says, oh, come on, really, Emily? Really? You thought she sounded great? I could barely stand to listen to her. It sounded like my ex-wife. Instead of going like this, which is what usually happens, you say, well, I didn't think so, and I think a lot of other people didn't think so. I mean, you don't change norms and attitudes by just going at it once or twice. And I think more and more women, if they're going to have a public voice, and they want to see us kind of get beyond the double standard, need to be willing to take the heat that comes with that. Because, look, I've been doing it a long time. It doesn't get any easier, but you do feel like you keep pushing, the agenda forward, and that's important. But look at the New York Times sports page from yesterday. Long article about women sportscasters. Knowledgeable women. They know their subject. Nobody argues they don't know their subject. And they're just constantly hit online and elsewhere. Oh, I can't stand to listen to her. Can't stand her voice. Can't stand. I mean, it's meant to just prevent you from having a voice on a public stage. And that's why, men have different kinds of voices, for heaven's sakes. And we need to say, this is what a woman senator looks like. This is what a woman engineer, a woman journalist, a woman publisher. Get used to it. And we need many, many more voices being willing to say that. So,
Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to talk to you all.
Our pleasure.
Thanks a lot. One of the rules of politics, when you start having a good time, it's time to go.